Welcome to Voice for Climate Youth, a podcast designed by youth to mainstream the awareness about climate change and urging for climate action. I am Lulu, your host for this podcast, and our topic for this first episode will be: Is climate change real? Young people debunk. While the changing climate has indeed affected millions of lives on Earth through a series of phenomena, skepticism on the existence of climate change still grows. More specifically, the idea that has progressed the most is not only a denial of change, but the notion that it is mainly due to the kinds of natural phenomena that the Earth has experienced throughout history. That such premise had led fewer people than before to consider that it is actually due to human activity. Now, this podcast will attempt to debunk the reality of our climate by revealing the reality of whether climate change exists, the process of climate change, and what pathways that we can do to build climate awareness. Together with us, our guest speaker, Nada Mohammed, our fellow Max Thabiso Edkins Climate Ambassador 2023, an initiative of Global Youth Climate Network by World Bank Group Youth to Youth Community, will share her insights upon this topic. Hi, Nada. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm super excited to be honored to speak about these very contentious topics that you raised.
Yay. Thank you so much. Now, Nada, before we jump on to the discussion, would you like to tell us about your current activities related to climate actions apart from being a Max Thabiso Edkins Climate Ambassador?
Yeah, sure. It will be my pleasure. So I'm part of multiple organizations, local organizations trying to advocate for climate action, including one called Ben Lastic Egypt. It helps to raise awareness among school kids as well as educational institution about the detriments of single-use plastic, and it's recently been making this combination between how plastic pollution could be actually a driver of climate change. So it's amazing. I'm also part of the Climate Reality Leadership Corps, and I give frequent sessions to school kids and have recently submitted my incubator's proposal. So I'm hoping that things will go well and you'll get the grant. So yeah, let's stop there.
Wow, I hope that things go well for you, and I hope that your great work may continue to inspire young people to act for climate. Now, let's move on to the core of our discussion today. So, because we are trying to debunk the reality, let's try to talk from the very basic beginning. Now, I would like to ask for your opinion about what is actually a climate change. Is it a natural phenomenon because the Earth has experienced it throughout history?
Okay, so going with the natural phenomenon kind of thing is the least valid part about it. The natural part of climate change can be attributed to the Earth rotation as well as the sun-solar cycle, where we have a lot of flares coming off the sun, warming the planet and going through ice ages, and after that. However, these things have already been existent since the beginning of history. We have not recorded any such levels of extreme weather events, sea level rises, etc., since the 18th and the 19th century. So we cannot blame the Earth or the sun for this one. It's definitely the human beings.
I see. Does human activities contribute to this particular climate change?
Yeah, 100%. When we look at the Industrial Revolution and how it has incited a lot of activities when it comes to fossil fuel burning and coal usage and the current consumers environment that it had developed, all of this has compromised the Earth's capability to offset all of these carbon emissions that are occurring. And what we're seeing right now are a product of all of these activities, being agriculture, deforestation, as well as other activities like mining, etc.
I see. So now we can see that there is actually a huge contribution from human activities into the existence of the climate change. As you already said before, that how human activities could contribute into releasing greenhouse gases, which then that leads into the another topic of global warming. Now, we have seen that the term global warming have been appeared in many climate change conversations, and somehow it is correlated with climate change, but yet we don't know what are the actual correlations. So what is actually the difference between global warming and also climate change, and how does climate change relate to global warming?
So you're very right. Global warming and climate change are being used interchangeably despite having completely or kind of different significance. And I myself used to fall into that trap before like I did my own research. So when we're talking about global warming, we're just addressing the issue of temperature and having like this planetary temperature increase over the periods of times. However, when we're talking about climate change, we're not just talking about temperature rise. We're talking about changing wind patterns. We're talking about changing precipitation, as well as issues like rainfall, snowfall, etc., and how these leads to extreme weather events and other occurrences that are completely unwanted and very unsafe for the human future.
I see. So let's say if we want to build the link or between climate change and global warming, so like the global warming can make the temperature of the earth gets warmer, and that such warm temperature could become a trigger into extreme events, for example like hurricanes and other stuff. Is it true?
Yes, definitely. We can consider global warming as an instigator to these different occurrences that happen within the climate.
I see. Now, we already established that first human activities have give a contribution towards the climate change, and yet global warming has an actual correlation with climate change. Now, would you like to tell us a very big example on what particular action or inaction from human that causes climate change?
Yeah, definitely. Mainly when we're talking about industrial activities, because almost all of them require fossil fuel burning. If we talk about like production and machineries, we're talking about as well things like transportation, something that we use every day in mass productions without even realizing that the detriment of everything on our planet. Like I mentioned before, the issue of deforestation and the actions of agriculture, because when we're thinking about the ecosystem, we're thinking about, let's say, carbon sinks, or let's say the stores, like when there are excessive carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions, we have the ocean and the land and the air trying to suck away excessive airs out of the planet. So when we adopt bad agricultural habits and use a lot of nitrous oxide and fertilizers, all of this contributed to compromising the planet's ability to adapt, to be able to try to offset whatever actions that are being enacted by the human beings.
I see. So because of these particular examples of human activity, some places or some regions have suffered the impacts of climate change. Now, does the impact of climate change are distributed equally in every part of the world, or are there any difference?
Like this is the overall dilemma of how life is unfair, as some would phrase it. Unfortunately, despite the fact that climate change does transcend all borders and all countries do experience it to some extent, not all of them experience it equally. And this is the core of the issue regarding climate justice. We have different countries experiencing climate change and climate impacts differently. We have individuals within the same country experiencing it differently. We have future generations that will definitely be experiencing it differently than we are. And all of this comes to the fact as to how climate change is a threat multiplier. A lot of countries are experiencing a lot of inequalities and lack of abilities, especially when we're talking about developing countries, small island developing states, and least developed countries. They do not have the capacities or the technical abilities in order to be able to avoid or to mitigate or to adapt to the current trends that are happening, the increasing extreme weather events like cyclones, hurricanes, and all of this contributes to them to their inability to try to go ahead and to try to be better and to improve their economies. It's just super detrimental to these people. And when we're talking about the global north, which is, of course, the rhetoric when we hear about how they are historically responsible for carbon emissions and the state where we are right now, we see them, yes, affected. Like currently we have a lot of forest fires in California, Australia, etc. However, these countries' abilities are relatively better. They are able to put like climate change warning systems. Their technologies are like they are able to adapt, and they are able to even move to a green economy. As opposed to other countries who want to grow economically, however, without relying, for in case in point, India, without relying on coal, for instance, they are not able to realize the full-fledged economy that they would have wished they were on the track on.
Exactly. That is very interesting point that you brought there, especially the difference between the global south and also the global north countries and their ability to adapt and mitigate with climate change. Now, having known that most of the global south countries are not that prepared, rather than the global north countries. Now, see that human activities, for example, like deforestation, which may trigger forest fire or pollution, occurs. Now, how does this climatic change phenomenon really affecting the current generation health and the future generation's health?
I'm not a health expert, however, in multiple ways. Like if we're talking about the direct impacts, of course, like extreme weather events like sea level rise and earthquakes that are induced by climate crisis leads to the death and the injury of a lot of people, if we're talking about that. Another aspect of the issues of the melting ice, rather than the sea level rise, all of us think, okay, melting ice, sea level rise, then we will be submerged and then we'll die. But another aspect actually is how these permafrost and ice store within them some diseases that are 100 years old. And these diseases, once the ice melts, what it does is it becomes a contagion. And I don't think that the current science will be able to curb such huge pandemics as had been resulted from the COVID-19 loss. Another thing is that when the weather generally gets warmer, that is when like vector-borne diseases and flies and bees and mosquitoes thrive. And what does that equate? It equates like issues increasing like malaria. We have issues with the crops and ultimately compromising our food security. Another aspect that like a bit obvious when it comes to the respiratory diseases and how the climate crisis leads to a lot of chronic as well as respiratory diseases. And of course, the issue regarding the mental health and how right now we are already grappling with a mental health crisis, and climate change for me is even causing me a lot of anxiety and is definitely putting a lot of stress on my mental health, which definitely reflects in the physical health. And there is nothing more to attest to the actual impact of climate change rather than the testimony of World Health Organization, how it says that climate change actually represents one of the greatest health threats in our country.
No, that's a really great point there, because climate change is not only impacting us physically, but in the same time it affects us mentally. So that's the reason why we should really care about climate change. And I noticed the point you brought about the warming temperature. See, it has been a very popular message among all the climate activists to help limit the temperature rising to 1.5 degrees. Even, for example, like in many climate negotiations, the number of the limit of rising temperature are sometimes becoming the reason why such negotiation take time very long. Like, sometimes people debating over whether we should put it into 1.5 or 2 degrees. Now, the question is, why should we really care about the change of 1 or 2 degrees of the global temperature?
That's a very interesting question, and it's actually a question that I used to be intimidated to answer because of the technicalities that comes into it. But I've heard this, like, listen to this lady who made the analogy, a metaphor between climate change and a human being. So let's imagine the planet, our planet Earth, is a human being. What happens when we get sick and have a fever and it rises above our like natural temperature to 1 degree Celsius? What happens is that the body begins to act up. The organs begin to fail. And that is exactly for the Earth. The Earth, the ecosystems is failing. It's acting up in terms of typhoons, cyclones, earthquakes. All of these are just general responses to whatever we're doing. We're just heating up this big human being, and it has a fever, and it's just like trying to make sense of what is happening, trying to reinstate the order in a manners of reacting in a very irrational ways. That is why we always are conscious about 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees Celsius, because there's a vast difference. Like if we compare to the coral reefs, a 1.5-degree world would lead to the loss of 70% of coral reefs, which is not ideal, to be honest, in comparison to a 2-degree world, which would lead to the 99% loss. And this applies on a lot of examples. That is why we need to be very conscious about not like just reaching a 1.5-degree world, but to try to push the negotiations for more ambitious actions.
That's really interesting because, we should take notice about how many times the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, have warned us that rising temperature could mean a lot into our life on Earth. And we should listen to the science. Now, next question. That's a very interesting discussions we had. Actually, in many cases now, we see that young people are optimistic enough to contribute in addressing climate change through, for example, personal and also collective actions. However, pessimism about climate change among young people do exist. And sometimes some other people who are pessimistic enough about climate change tries to influence the other who are, doing climate actions personally. Like, why should you do climate actions personally while it might not give a big contribution? Now, how do you see this particular phenomenon, and in what ways can we balance between this particular optimism and pessimism at the same time?
To me, I think that pessimism is an essential part of a climate activist journey, because you do a lot. You try to give a lot to the planet. And then you see that the world around you is not cooperating. And then you start listening to those voices that you talked about, like your individual actions do not matter. Why are you doing this in the first place? Is climate change even real? This is not important. Focus on your job, etc., etc. That is why it's really important for you to have this cheerleaders, to be very connected to the space. Because other than that, you will fall trapped into these very pessimistic voices. Because it's a natural reaction for human beings, not just when it comes to climate change, when it comes to basically throwing something in the bin. Okay, why would I throw it in the bin? It's like everybody does not do that. Why would my individual action matter? That is why it's very important to stay rooted to your values, as well as to stay connected with the climate space. And it's very important as well to try as much as you can to listen to good climate news, because as much as the bad dominates the space, there are good climate news that are coming up and that are being subdued by whatever is happening right now. And actually, the MTE ambassadors are currently working on a video showcasing the good in the climate space. So I encourage you to check it out whenever it's out, hopefully by June 5th.
Oh, wow. That's very cool. I mean, this is what I like from this particular network of, MTE climate ambassadors. And I take note of 3 of your top tips to, as a climate activist, to stay true within ourselves. First is stay in your own values and principles. Second is keep in touch with climate activist networks. And the third is always listen to good climate news. Very wonderful. Now, and of course, yes, I hope that we, all the audiences, can also access the latest video of the MTE Climate Ambassadors. So stay tuned. All right, so let's go to the next question. Now, as a young people, what fundamental pathways are available for us to contribute to mainstream, especially the reality of climate change itself?
I think before looking into mainstreaming climate change, we need to be very climate educated to a large extent. Because young people in general are being underestimated in multiple spaces, not just like on policy fora. No, you're being underestimated even within your household. So you need to face them with the fact. You need to educate yourself in order for you to gain confidence. Like I myself, when I don't know something, is like, why would I be confident in front of X, Y, Z? So you need to really, really educate yourself. And climate education does not take one form. It can take multiple forms. You can start by following an activist or an influencer, climate influencer that's really interesting and simplifies the matter so that you can grasp it. You can follow people like Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General. You can listen to a podcast like this, like with two friends just chit-chatting about what's happening. And of course, the second step is to try to join organizations, local organizations preferably, in order to be able to amplify your impact. Also, whenever you're there, just make sure to deliver and to confer the knowledge to young people like you, because for me, when I started, I did not know about climate crisis and I did not have any guidance. So you need to be there. You need to mentor them. You need to be there along the way in order for them, especially young climate activists, not to lose hope, because that happens really quickly. And the third thing is to step it up a bit and to tap into the finance. I think recently, since COP26 till now, there's been a lot of competitions regarding asking for innovative solutions, for climate change, etc., and offering a lot of grants. So I think finance, when it comes to this area, is not short. It does not fall short. But what you need is for you to educate yourself, have a solution. Don't be afraid to showcase it, and hopefully your project will be picked, and you will have greater impact on the environment and on the people. And yeah, that's it.
That's a really great message for the audiences. I think that I do really agree that before we are trying to educate the other, for example, like mainstreaming the reality of climate change, what we really need to do is to establish a strong fundament for our own self. And that's a very critical point right there. Now, it is very bad because we have to end the conversation for today. But before ending the conversation, I would like to ask, what message would you like to convey for young people and also the listeners concerning climate change?
I think I would like to reiterate previous messages. Like, don't ever underestimate your individual actions, because it does matter and it's going to lead you to places, trust me. And have faith in yourself. Educate yourself about climate change. And always remember that climate change is a non-linear path. It has its ups and it has its downs. What's most important is for you to stay grounded and to give yourself a break and to give yourself credit, because you cannot care for the planet without caring for yourself.
Wonderful message. Thumbs up. Thank you so much, Nada, for sharing your insights on Voice for Climate YouTube Podcast Episode 1, designed by you to mainstream awareness on climate change and urging for climate action. Thank you for listening, and see you on future episodes.